Wanna talk? So let's talk. Here. Talk. You wanna talk? You gotta talk, you need to talk. News talk.
I talk, you talk to Solomon. I talk, you talk to Solomon. Yeah, let's talk to Solomon. Talk to Solomon.
You gotta talk, you wanna talk.
Thanks for joining us here on Talk to Solomon. Appreciate your being here. I'm Stan Solomon. I'm the host and my co-host,
Chief Steve.
former Police Chief Steve Davis, and we are delighted to welcome once again the Executive Director of the most focused and pro-Second Amendment organization in the history of this country, the Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt. Hello, Larry.
Stan, it's good to be with both you and the Chief.
Well, thanks for joining us. I must tell you, I'm encouraged. I'm delighted. I'm excited. It seems that Eric Holder has had a come-to-Jesus moment. He's decided to pull an indictment out of his Pelosi and actually go after someone, allegedly, who is responsible for the death of Brian Terry. Please, tell me I'm not having just indigestion.
I think it's a bit of cognitive dissonance. The Attorney General can't shake the fact with one indictment, with one accusation, that he's been found in contempt of Congress. This is a guy who is going to have his case put before the D.C. federal court, and they may or may not demand that he cough up the records. If they don't, then it'll go to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, and there's a better chance that he might actually be found in contempt of court if he doesn't produce the documents. Now, my personal thinking is Eric Holder would rather go to jail for a few months in contempt of court rather than risk making public what's in all those documents that the U.S. House of Representatives is demanding, because that might put him in jail for 5 lifetimes.
Well, I believe that the Obama administration, and I don't place it at Eric Holder's feet, I place it at Barack Obama's feet, decided when they got in that it was their day to do whatever the hell they wanted. And one of the things they wanted to do was find a reason to eliminate the protections of the Second Amendment. Chief?
Well, when this goes to court, the interesting part what I'm thinking about is that there's going to be records put into evidence that's going to be part of the trail that leads into this fast and furious investigation. So whatever gets admitted into this criminal trial will also be somewhat connected to the Eric Holder's withholding of evidence.
Now, Eric Holder's time in office has been a time where he's accused everyone that didn't go along with him of being a racist, everyone who questioned him of being attacking him personally, and believes that he has no reason to agree to enforce or even pay attention to something called the law. Now, he just was in front of the NAACP and got a standing ovation. Your comments?
That's very sad that they would support him in something like that. But then, of course, from what I understand, the NAACP is pretty much a shell of its former self. Blacks don't see any use for it anymore. But for that group of liberals in the NAACP to applaud a man who's been found in contempt of Congress over what involves some 400 dead Mexicans and a couple of U.S. federal agents, with all kinds of documents that have already been submitted indicating that this government set out upon the project of Fast and Furious, intending to get people murdered, intending to get guns into the hands of the cartel to facilitate what cartel does. And when it happened, one of the documents that was submitted into the record last April of last year indicated that the director at the time of the ATF, when he got his regular briefings and he saw the body counts increasing every month over the previous month and over the year before, he would express pleasure That's exactly what kind of people we have running our government. The chief law enforcement operation in Washington is really a bunch of cutthroats who took pleasure in seeing people get murdered.
Well, they took pleasure in the numbers. Don't know that they personally wanted, the demise of any individual, and certainly they didn't want the demise of the United States officials because of the heat it brought. But the bottom line was the motivation, and as I understand the motivation, that the claim was that a large percentage of the firearms used in Mexico came from the United States, and by increasing that number just so it could meet the phony numbers that they were quoting, they felt that they could use that to shut down or partially shut down the operations of people selling firearms in the border states and then throughout the country. Is that close?
They were claiming 90% of the guns used in crime in Mexico originated in the United States. That was simply not true. The Mexicans had gathered up the serial numbers on guns that they thought might have come from the United States, and that's what they submitted. But of all of the guns found at all of the crime scenes in Mexico, when you look through them, you realize that the guns that were supposedly the big problem coming from the United States wasn't 90%, it was about 18%. And so they were caught in a lie. They were definitely interested in increasing U.S. sourced guns getting into Mexico. And as one of the officials, Mark Choate in Washington at the ATF headquarters, emailed to the head of the project out of the Phoenix office, hey, have any of our Fast and Furious guns turned up at crime scenes? We'd like to use that as a predicate for more gun control. So I don't know how much more plain it has to be. This government ought to be known as Murder Are Us.
Chief?
Well, I agree with Larry more than I do with you, Stan, that I don't think that our government would really care how many agents were killed or how many people were killed as long as they don't get caught doing it. And
Yes.
actually, the more they get killed, the better, because that just bolsters their cause. But as far as the NAACP, their name says the advancement of colored people. They're going to support Eric Holder because he's black no matter what. If it was the advancement of conservative people, they'd pitch him out on his ear.
Well, if we had a National Association for the Advancement of Conservative People, I'm sure the Supreme Court, by a 5-4 decision, would find it to be racist, unconstitutional, unacceptable, and immoral.
Hate speech.
Yeah, unbelievable. All right, well, let's go to gun control, because it's being said, and not lightly, that this administration, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, representing, the two power sources on the left, both are trying to find a way to disarm the American people so that the government can demand whatever they demand, and there's nothing we can do but comply. And this new UN treaty, I don't know what they call it, I think they call it the Screw You Treaty, but this new treaty that we're being told is going to be signed by Barack Obama, we know could never be ratified, but if they call it an agreement and not a treaty, it doesn't need to be ratified, if you will.
Right now they're calling it a treaty. Your point is well taken. If they were to change the nomenclature, they might have a better shot at it, and then we'd have to count on the House Republicans defunding the implementation of it. Jerry Moran, senator from Kansas, actually has a bill to defund the negotiations for that treaty, but Harry Reid wasn't exactly in a hurry to get that through the Senate, and it looks like July 27 is going to be the signing date. So then we're going to have a treaty sitting there waiting for Senate approval. Now, frankly, I don't think Harry Reid's Senate will approve that treaty, but I'm concerned that from what we've seen them do in other areas, when faced with lack of treaty authority, they can go ahead anyway and say, well, we're just being a good citizen of the world. All these other countries have signed onto this treaty, and we need to be enforcing it as well, because that's what it takes to be a good citizen here in our brave new world. And I could see them moving to tell dealers, we'll pull your license if you sell to a civilian caliber larger than 380 or a 38, and we'll pull your license if you sell any number of the guns that were on Bill Clinton's wish list in the gun ban that he passed. Those are the kinds of things that I can see them doing. Do they have legal authority for that? No, but the dealers depend for their daily and weekly income on that unconstitutional license that they were required to get. And so the government has that string that they can pull, and those dealers fall like a house of cards if that were to happen. So I'm very concerned about this treaty, even if our government doesn't ratify it in the Senate.
Chief?
Well, I'm also very, very concerned about this, and people keep, I hear these comments all the time from people, from my cold dead hands and all that. Well, it's around the corner, and we're going to have to do something. I don't want us to have to just hope and wish that maybe the Senate won't ratify it. This is very, very serious, and we need to get a lot more done, and people need to get a lot more active on this issue. And no one's really talking about it other than Larry and Dick Morris, the only other person I've heard talking about this, and this is the most significant thing on the Second Amendment I've heard in years.
Now, there are some that feel that the government of the United States has the authority to enforce until the Senate has a vote, whether they affirm it or deny it. As you just said, we've seen some treaties where they act as though it were law until it's official, it's not law. Is that what you're talking about?
I'll give you an example. Was a gold mine about 5 miles, I think it was 3 miles outside the outer perimeter of Yellowstone National Park. They went through $3 million worth of bother to get the mine back up to snuff, get it approved, and reopen the New World gold mine. New World or New Age gold mine. It kind of ironic in view of what happened to them. So they were on the verge of getting back in business. The Clinton bureaucrats were alarmed that Mother Earth was going to have this gouging experience taking place so close to the park. And so what they did was to run off to the UN and got it declared as a World Heritage Site. And what that says is, I think it's 10 miles, nothing can be done, nothing motorized can be done within those 10 miles. So the gold mine was put out of business. And it was done by people at the UN, not an action of the United States government, but we acceded to what the UN was doing. And that, I think, was the criminal impeachable offense that was committed, because the UN was acting as if they were our Department of the Interior, which shouldn't exist either, by the way.
All right. Well, there's a lot being talked about with this treaty. Of course, I understand on the 27th of this month, Hillary plans a signing. Soros is putting out the propaganda that, this treaty doesn't eliminate private ownership within a country. It just has to do with guns being sold from one country to another, a little bit like Fast and Furious. But the reality is that it doesn't, first of all, they have no authority to guarantee or not guarantee anything inside of our borders. That's extra constitutional. And let me just stop here and ask this question, because I'm asked this question by people all the time. I give them an answer. They may or may not accept it. I believe, and Larry, your opinion, and then we'll get Chief's. I believe that the United States Constitution empowers the President and the Executive Department. It empowers the Legislative Department, and it empowers the Judicial Department. But it doesn't give them the power to go outside of the constraints of the Constitution. To the best of my reading and my research. Do you see where I'm going?
In the treaty clause in the Constitution, it talks about a treaty being the supreme law of the land when it's made under the authority of the United States. Well, the Second Amendment, among other things, makes it very clear that there is no authority given to the United States to allow an international body, or anybody for that matter, to regulate the movement of guns according to one draft we've seen throughout the country. So there would be apparently the way they would try to reach inside the borders of the United States and control what kind of, how many firearms are available to American citizens to buy. That, I think, is there's quite a confusion about, is a treaty always the supreme law of the land? Does it knock out some other provision of the Constitution? And the answer is no, the Constitution provides that that's impossible. Now, they may want to act as if it's that way, and then we're going to have to fall back on constitutional sheriffs to arrest ATF and FBI agents if they try to mess with gun stores.
But I am correct in saying to people that no president, no House, no Senate, no Supreme Court or any court under the Supreme Court is awarded or is given or has the authority to agree to something that the Constitution doesn't give them the authority to agree to. Isn't that simply correct?
That puts it exactly like that. That's what they're up against.
Chief?
Well, until the Supreme Court rules that guns are taxes, maybe you're right.
Good shot.
All right. By the way,
that Chief Justice really made a laughing stock out of himself. He was so concerned about his and the court's image, and I think he may have done more to destroy its image than any number of other things in the past.
well, there's all kinds of talk that he's very sophisticated and he was, planning a time bomb in Obama's re-election campaign. But the reality is his decision until it is overturned, or that decision until it's overturned by an ensuing Supreme Court decision, basically says that if the government calls it a tax, it can force Americans to do or not to do anything. Is that correct or not?
I would go back to what the chief just said. They can define guns as taxes, and off we go. We'll just regulate those and tax them at maybe 500 or 600%, which, by the way, was what they did when they passed the Machine Gun Act of 1934. They put a $200 tax on each machine gun sale. Well, in that time, $200 was perhaps equivalent to, I don't know, $10,000. It was quite a hefty tax. And that's the game that they can play. They can just tax it right out of existence.
Well, we will see what we will see. And that, of course, is the issue. Now, let's talk about politics for a bit. You're there in the belly of the beast, in the district of criminals, where you can't turn in any direction and not see a liar, a thief, a despot, and that just might be one person. What is the feel? I mean, according to all of the quote-unquote data, Barack Obama has to count living, dead, and imaginary. He has to count those who have, haven't, mightn't, and shouldn't vote, and then he's still losing. Is it that strongly against him at this point?
I think there's a rising tide of anger at what this government is doing to we the people that may well surpass what happened in 2010. I listened to how Dick Morris explains how this is coming. This is not going to be a wave election. It's going to be a tsunami, according to Morris. He's frequently right. I hope he's right this time. We've got some wonderful candidates that most of whom have made it or are making it through primaries. We've talked a little bit about Steve Stockman. In fact, tomorrow I'm scheduled to be down in Houston, outside of Houston, campaigning for him. Surveys show that he's running well against the front runner in the runoff election. It's closed a bit, but nevertheless, I think if anybody can pull it off, Steve Stockman is the guy. I think it was a 7-man field. He got into second place on $23,000. That's the guy you want to have manage your campaign.
You got that right. Of course, you got Jessica Bradshaw down there running in the 34th. You've got Cruz running for the Senate nomination.
And he's
all of them are
looking
Tea
good
Party
in the
candidates.
polls. Cruz could very well be the next senator from Texas, and that'll be like having another Rand Paul or a Jim DeMint.
Well, from your mouth to God's ear, we need to see a string of strong, wow, say that when you're sober, a string of strong conservatives sufficient that they can either force McConnell's hand or replace him, so that we see true grit on the Republican side. Now, McConnell has even said, and he's very tentative, and probably smartly so politically, that there's a 50-50 chance the Republicans can take the Senate. I believe the Republicans are going to pick up at least 5, and more likely 8 seats, could pick up as many as 10, but there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they're going to take the Senate. What's your thought?
I tend to agree with that, and that would also be Dick Morris's position. And this is a guy that looks at polls and their internals and compares them over time. And for him to be of the opinion that it's going to be an extraordinarily good election year for the Republicans, I think is significant. And I've been doing some traveling, and I can tell you that the energy that I find among those of us at the grassroots level is rather considerable. I'm reminded of a man you talk about energy. My wife and I were so energized in 2010 that we hadn't knocked on doors since I was in office in the state legislature a couple of decades and more ago. So we knocked on this one older guy's door, and yeah, he was going to vote with us. And so are you likely to vote, or you need any help getting a vote? He said, I can't wait to vote.
Chief?
I think it's very important that we get some really good candidates in office so we can really see what they do, some Tea Party conservative candidates, because right now it really seems like people are energized to vote against people, not for anybody. And so while I agree, let's vote Obama out in a big tsunami, and we must take the Senate. We must take the Senate to repeal the Obamacare taxes. But I can't wait to get some good office holders in there so we can compare them, what we got now, and see what we need to have in the future.
Yes.
You know, I think it's funny. I heard Juan Williams, who I think is related to Obama via sexual intercourse. But the fact is that they keep saying, well, now that Obamacare has been found constitutional, quote unquote, there's nothing you can do about it. And I wanted to say, and as I shouted at my radio, hey, it's just a tax. Taxes are changed all the time. All it takes is a majority, and you can change any tax. So if Obamacare is a tax, they can simply vote to lower or eliminate a tax. That's not even rocket science, is it?
And it's even more encouraging than that, encouraging as that is, because it's a tax revenue measure, it goes to the Senate on a 51 vote passage requirement. It cannot be filibustered.
And that's huge.
So the door is wide open. So all they need is to pick up, what, 5 seats, 4 seats?
Well, they pick up 3 seats in the White House. They can still do it. Of course,
Exactly.
I don't know if we can count on every Republican, so maybe we need to pick up 8 seats. But Lugar's gone, thank you, God. And although in Utah, what's his name?
Hatch.
Hatch survived. I think he's going to vote very conservatively. I mean, he said, reelect me, and because I am a conservative, and I got a feeling he's going to vote very conservatively, at least in the first 3 years.
Let's hope. I don't put any great confidence in Orrin Hatch. He's a pretty slippery guy.
But he's been burned badly.
Josh Mandel in Ohio. He could pull it off. Clark Durant, I was up there campaigning for him in his primary against a Rhino member of the U.S. House. Clark Durant is another Rand Paul, a Mike Lee, a Jim DeMint. We've talked about Dewhurst already. There are some good folks that if they make it in this good year, not only will there be an increase in Republicans in the Senate, but oh my, the center of the party, the center of gravity of the party will be moving to the right. And as you said earlier, either Mitch McConnell will recognize that, or he might be invited to one of those nice offices outside the majority leader's office.
Now, let's talk about Bonner, John Boehner. Many of us have been disappointed with Boehner. Wouldn't you agree, Chief?
Out. Get him out. Out.
Because I don't think he has a conservative side, nor does he have a liberal side. He has a can't we all get along side. I think he's Rodney King's, long-lost brother.
I tell you, not only do I agree with you all, but I have settled in my mind on one that if I had it in my power, I would make Darrell Issa the head of the U.S. House. Darrell Issa is a self-made multimillionaire. He's the wealthiest guy in the Congress. It's $300 million in worth. I have watched him during the hearings, and he has all of that material in his very quick mind for his instant use, and he's been very effective asking questions. You'd think he'd been trained as a lawyer, but that's not the case. He just is so able in a cross-examination, asking the pertinent questions, and he obviously knew how to kind of let Holder have a little bit of the leash until all of a sudden he's jerking it back, and Holder's caught really on his own leash. It's been very interesting to watch Darrell Issa move, and the fact that he clearly has a backbone. He evidently had to overcome a lot of reluctance and resistance from John Boehner, the Speaker, and nevertheless did it. And now he's got this contempt vote. You can just imagine how upset Boehner must have been about finding the Attorney General in contempt of Congress. Oh my, what do we do? Well, they did it. And even 17 Democrats came with him. And I looked at the Democrats, the districts they're from, and they're all people that are facing really stiff challenges. Matheson in Utah is facing a black Mormon mayor woman opponent. Mia Love may well eat his lunch. She's quite a phenomenon. She went into the convention. I'm pretty sure the guy we were backing, a state legislator who had really stood up to the establishment, everything we like in a candidate, Carl Wimmer. And I think he had a plurality in this convention of a several candidate field. But when Mia Love gave her speech, she walked out of that convention with 72% of the vote of the convention. That's what kind of an opponent Matheson has. And the others, 16 of those 17 Democrats, are probably in somewhat comparable positions where the district is leaning or is Republican. And the only advantage they have is that they are an incumbent, but in a greatly perhaps redrawn district. So that's, I think, the politics of why that was a bipartisan vote for contempt. But it was bipartisan all the same. Let's just hope we won't have those 17 around next January, and we don't have to worry about being as bipartisan.
Well, I did hear something interesting. I don't know if you heard this story, Chief, but they said that in the last presidential election, 2008, when Barack Obama was elected, that Democrats voted more than Republicans did by 7 points, and that in fact was his margin. They're now, in many of the polls, they're presuming that the Democrats are going to hold that or even increase that. The last ABC poll, they assumed that the Democrats would outvote Republicans by 9 points, where I see it being just the opposite. I see in this election, because the reason that McCain lost was not because more people liked Barack Obama, it was because Republicans didn't like him and they didn't come out for him. Would you agree with that?
I would agree very much with that. And Mitt Romney runs the same risk. And I think the reason that it may not be as serious a problem for Romney is that the intensity of our vote is so great. And the pollsters don't know what to do with it. Remember that in Wisconsin, during the recall election, on the day of the election, the polling of people coming out was so skewed that the commentator said, well, folks, get your popcorn. This is going to be a long movie. We're going to be here late tonight. Oops, the first precinct that came in was for Walker. The second was for Walker. The third was for Walker. It never was close. That's how off those exit polls were. And if they can't even get an exit poll right, then let's not get too upset about what they're saying in these other polls, because as you point out, they have to make assumptions. How many of the Democrats, how many of the Republicans are going to vote, how much slippage is there going to be for each party, what's the intensity. These are things that you have to really guess about. And it strikes me as really strange that we still have major polling companies polling citizens, or maybe not even that, maybe just people, and not saying, are you registered to vote? Do you intend to vote? How likely are you to vote? In other words, really dig to find out whether that is a true likely voter, because those are the only ones we care about. Those are the only ones whose opinion matters.
Well, yes and no, because the Democrats vote early, vote often, and vote for everyone living, dead, and even thought about. I mean, after all, Barack Obama has the Social Security number of a guy born in 1897. Gee?
From Connecticut.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that people like somebody that stands up for something, and in the last presidential election, John McCain stood up for nothing, and so there was no enthusiasm to vote for him. But I really believe that people are willing to vote more against something than for something, and they're right now against Obamacare tax, and they're against Obamacare's socialism, and they're going to come out and throw him out of office big time.
Well,
I think so.
Go ahead, Larry.
I think that's right. And a lot of us probably have the view that Mark Levin, the well-known talk show host, had articulated, that if we've got to get rid of Obama for the reasons the chief just pointed to, and if all we have is an orange juice can to vote against Obama to get him out, then I'm voting for the orange juice can, and that's the way I feel. When I go vote on November 6th, I'll be voting for an orange juice can.
Well, I'll give Governor Romney a bit more content than the orange juice can, but the reality is we have to understand, and I'll close with this because we're out of time, that our job is not to get Obama out. Our job is to get Obama out, get Romney in, and then be on Romney like white on rice. Put so much pressure on him that he simply can't take a deep breath without inhaling a conservative. And
that would be another reason for having Darrell Issa as a speaker.
There we go.
Darrell Issa would clearly have the backbone to pick up the phone and say, Mr. Romney, what you're doing right now needs to be changed in this way, or you need to stop what you're doing. And I can assure you that I will have the House behind what I'm saying.
Love it. And on that note, we thank you so much, Larry. Tell your lovely wife we said hello. And I know you're off to Bible study. And I shouldn't have said that on a national broadcast, because now one of the alphabet soup agencies will certainly come and lump you in with terrorists and other, terrible
It's bad
people.
enough we talk politics, but religion too.
Oh, okay. Well, may God bless. Thanks,
You too.
Larry Pratt. We'll be back shortly with more here on Talk to Solomon.
If I wanted America to fail, to follow, not lead, to suffer, not prosper, to despair, not dream, I'd start with energy. I'd cut off America's supply of cheap, abundant energy. I couldn't take it by force. So I'd make Americans feel guilty about using the energy that heats their homes, fuels their cars, runs their businesses, and powers their economy. I'd make cheap energy expensive, so that expensive energy would seem cheap. I would empower unelected bureaucrats to all but outlaw America's most abundant sources of energy. After banning its use in America, I'd make it illegal for American companies to ship it overseas. If I wanted America to fail, I'd use their schools to teach one generation of Americans that their factories and their cars will cause a new ice age, and I'd muster a straight face so I could teach the next generation that they're causing global warming. When it's cold out, I'd call it climate change instead. I'd imply that America's cities and factories could run on wind power and wishes. I'd teach children how to ignore the hypocrisy of condemning logging, mining, and farming while having roofs over their heads, heat in their homes, and food on their tables. I would never teach children that the free market is the only force in human history to uplift the poor, establish the middle class, and create lasting prosperity. Instead, I demonize prosperity itself so that they will not miss what they will never have. If I wanted America to fail, I would create countless new regulations and seldom cancel old ones that would be so complicated that only bureaucrats, lawyers, and lobbyists could understand them. That way small businesses with big ideas wouldn't stand a chance. And I would never have to worry about another Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, or Steve Jobs. I would ridicule as flat earthers those who urge them to lower energy costs by increasing supply. And when the evangelists of common sense try to remind people about the laws of supply and demand, I'd enlist the sympathetic media to drown them out. If I wanted America to fail, I would empower unaccountable bureaucracy seated in a distant capital to bully Americans out of their dreams and their property rights. I'd send federal agents to raid guitar factories for using the wrong kind of wood. I'd force homeowners to tear down their own homes built on their own land. I'd make it almost impossible for farmers to farm, miners to mine, loggers to log, and builders to build. Because I don't believe in free markets, I'd invent false ones. I'd devise fictitious products like carbon credits and trade them in imaginary markets. I'd convince people that this would create jobs and be good for the economy. If I wanted America to fail, for every concern I'd invent a crisis, and for every crisis I'd invent a cause, like shutting down entire industries and killing tens of thousands of jobs in the name of saving spotted owls. And when everyone learned the stunning irony that the owls were victims of their larger cousins and not people, it would already be decades too late. If I wanted America to fail, I'd make it easier to stop commerce than to start it, easier to kill jobs than create them, more fashionable to resent success than to seek it. When industries seek to create jobs, I'd file lawsuits to stop them, and then I'd make taxpayers pay for my lawyers. If I wanted America to fail, I would transform the environmental agenda from a document of conservation to an economic suicide pact. I would concede entire industries to our economic rivals by imposing regulations that cost trillions. I would celebrate those who preach environmental austerity in public while indulging a lavish lifestyle in private. I convince Americans that Europe has it right and that America has it wrong. If I wanted America to fail, I would prey on the goodness and the decency of ordinary Americans. I would only need to convince them that all of this is for the greater good. If I wanted America to fail, I suppose I wouldn't change a thing.
You have a computer, if you're alive today, which means you have a hard drive, which means it's going to break down. Mosey, the backup people, for thousands, for Stan, for thousands of people, for tens of thousands of people, is simply common sense. You go to cpnlive.com, click on the icon for Mosey, the backup people, and sign up. It's just a few dollars a month. Let me tell you something. We had a break-in. They stole our whole computer. You know what? When they take the computer, you can't recover anything, but we had Mosey. We had the backup. We were able to restore everything simply by buying another computer. cpnlive.com, click on the icon for Mosey, the backup people, and give yourself common sense, peace of mind, great value, the best thing you've ever done. Sooner or later, it's going to be Mosey, the backup people.